Yeah, and now like I guess we can begin kind of talking about the residents filing suit against Smithfield Foods. Spoiler alert, they win after 7 years of litigation. Take us through that process and how that began, what really stuck out to you in researching this for your book.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a lawyer by training. I worked in litigation and in the court system and the federal courts, so it was really natural for me to work on this story and to bring it to life. I mean, the law can be boring, but the law can also be incredibly dramatic when you have amazing people going up against a gigantic corporation and actually bringing justice to the courthouse, notwithstanding the pushback from an industry that was basically owned the legislature and was able to get special laws passed to try to kill the litigation in the process. And I mean, the level of the rallying that went on, the PR push, millions of dollars to create a grassroots organization to oppose the litigation, all this funded by industry, rallying the thousands of hog growers and families, and to make it like, look, these out of state trial lawyers are trying to take down the farm families in North Carolina, which is what Smithfield, the Chinese owned multi-billion dollar behemoth, was, that was their tagline. We're standing for family farmers, and these out of state trial lawyers who also happen to be from North Carolina, are trying to take down the poor family farmers from Eastern North Carolina. It's just wild. I mean, the level of lying, the level of deception, the level, of corporate capture of a legislature, and all that's told. It was so much fun to write it into the story because the drama was all real. I mean, I wasn't having to make any of it up, but I often thought as a novelist I couldn't make up anything better. I mean, it's just it's surreal. So yeah, the origin story of the litigation is Smithfield had agreed in 2000 after Hurricane Floyd blew through and dumped many feet of rain and flooded all of these lagoons and killed billions of fish in the Neuse River and others from these plumes of hog waste flowing down into the beautiful Albemarle and Pamlico sounds inside the Outer Banks. Smithfield had been forced by the state to invest in new technology. They invested in it. The scientists developed it, and then Smithfield torpedoed it after spending a mere $25 million. After a decade, technologies developed to replace lagoons and spray fields, but Smithfield uses a technicality in the agreement with the state AG to shut it down, and it was never deployed. It was considered economically infeasible because it was $1 more expensive than the medieval lagoons and spray fields. So Smithfield was able to basically win this, this political contest and shut everything down. The media had gone away. The state, the governor, the legislature was basically in the pocket of industry. So, the neighbors, they knew that their only hope was to get a lawyer to represent them in the courthouse. The challenge was, what lawyer worth their salt would take on a multi-billion dollar behemoth like this that has so much political power. You're just going to be flushing your career, your law firm down the toilet, and nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to come near it until one day in 2013, it just so happened that these folks connected with the one lawyer in North Carolina. I mean, really, the one lawyer who would have been able to take this on. Her name's Mona Lisa Wallace, and she's really the star of Wastelands, one of the stars. And she's a really remarkable woman. I mean, she came from a working class family in a multiracial area. She was a graduate from her newly desegregated high school in Salisbury, North Carolina, and has always had a real heart for racial issues and environmental causes. And she was successful in going up against a number of polluting industries in the past. And so when she heard about this, she was like, I'm disgusted this is happening in my state. I know it's going to cost a ton of money, millions of dollars. I know that I have no idea if we'll ever get any of that back. But I just can't see this happening in North Carolina. Like, somebody needs to stand up and go toe to toe with this industry. She agreed. She basically took it on in 2013, and it did, as you mentioned, it took 7 years. Went through 5 federal trials in Raleigh, in 2018 and 19. She brought on board one of the best trial attorneys in the country, Mike Heskey, to handle the cases in front of the jury. Mike is an incredible person, and he also is a star in Wastelands. It was so much fun to get to know him. Mona had she's got a small firm. It's a very family firm. So her daughter was part of the litigation team. Her nephew was part of the litigation team. And the other lawyers that work with her, just a handful of them, really, it's like a family. And so they became extremely close to the 500 plaintiffs that they represented from 26 communities. They brought 26 cases. These are called mass actions, not a class action. So they have to manage all 500 plaintiffs as individual clients. And they had 26 cases that they were managing with these a small firm, Mona's firm, and then Mike is basically a solo practitioner. And they had a little bit of help, but it truly was a David versus Goliath story, because Smithfield hired one of the biggest law firms in the world, 1,000 attorneys, McGuire Woods, to represent them. And they had, parachutes for pockets, as I put it in the book, and spent tens of millions of dollars. Nobody knows how much, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was north of $50 million on the litigation. And, all to basically try to stave off these Black people from saying, hey, look, you've been polluting our land for 30 years. Just stop it. Just stop. Just clean up. We don't want you to go out of business. We don't want you to stop making bacon. Just make it in a cleaner way. And frankly, honor the promise you made back in 2000 to replace lagoons and spray fields. Just use the new tech that you paid to develop. You're just going to cost a little bit more, maybe a lot more initially, but you need to do it because it's a cost that should be on your bottom line and not borne by society. That really was the fundamental argument. And in the end, the jury, I wish I could play for you and your audience. I mean, that I've got this presentation that I do when I speak about this. And I mean, it's just the videos, the pictures are just overwhelming. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The jury got to see it. And so it wasn't entirely surprising that they responded the way they did.
And just to put a button on this before I let you go, Corban, how did they respond? Like, what was the monetary compensation in the end of this?
Yeah, so the third trial of the 5 delivered the largest verdict in North Carolina history. So of the 500 plaintiffs, it was just 8 people, 8 neighbors in one neighborhood, and it was nearly $500 million in mostly punitives. I mean, so basically the jury was saying to Smithfield, stop it, cut it out. Like, we don't have the ability to force you to get rid of these lagoons and spray fields, but we're going to make you feel a world of hurt for having done what you've done. And really, that third trial in many ways, is the sort of culmination of the story as I tell it, though there were 2 trials afterward that, ultimately precipitated a settlement. Unfortunately, the settlement was confidential. I don't know how much it is, but I know Mona and Mike really well. And I can tell you that with 500 plaintiffs, you're talking about a lot of money. I know that, they got compensation. I don't know how much, but I do know that it was transformative for some of these folks, in really beautiful ways, sending kids to college, making improvements on homes that desperately needed it, allowing for retirement for some people who probably wouldn't have been able to retire. They didn't get rich and didn't want to get rich from this settlement. But ultimately what they wanted is for the industry to change. So the industry is now, starting to see the light. But unfortunately, and, your politics podcast, I mean, at the end of the day, like, this is a political problem, and the solution has to be in the legislature. Cory Booker's got a great law called the Farm System Reform Act that, if we could get Congress to be sensible, would actually rein in corporate, companies like Smithfield, these large-scale agricultural companies across the board, not just in pork, and really require some meaningful regulation and some changes in the way that our meat is produced in the United States, changes that would make it more humane and more humane for the neighbors and more humane for the animals, and ultimately be better for all of us. But right now, we have corporate capture in the United States of America, and it is a challenge.
You're right. I keep, returning to just, we could just regulate this, as opposed to having to have these punctuated moments in history where you have class action suits or mass action suits that result in companies essentially having to pay fines, but nothing structurally changes. And I think that's a great lesson to take away from this. Corban Addison.
Absolutely.
The book is Wastelands: The True Story of Farm Country on Trial. We'll put a link to your book in the descriptions everywhere you're listening to or watching this. Corban, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma. Take care.
Take care.